Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this breakout session. I'm Amanda Bergson-Shilcock with National Skills Coalition, and we know that you're joining us from all over the country, so good afternoon, good morning, or whatever time of day it may be where you are. We're going to do this in a conversational format, so there won't be slides, there won't be canned presentations. We're just going to have a conversation that's very practical and very pragmatic. My guess and my hope is that you're here in this breakout room because you sold to some degree on the concept of a skills-based learning and earning ecosystem. And the question you have is, how do we make it a reality in a way that is effective and equitable and actually accomplishes the goals that we have, and how do we advocate for that to be a reality? And I am using advocacy in the big tent sense. You could be an advocate within your own organization, with your peers and your colleagues. You can be an advocate with the media if your job involves public communications. You could be an advocate with elected officials and other policymakers. And my guess is that many of you are an advocate in multiple different ways. So our conversation today is really going to be sort of talking through, well, what does it mean to be advocating for this learning and earning ecosystem? What are some practical building blocks that you can keep in mind as you're having these conversations? And we're really lucky to have two outstanding panelists with us today to help us think that through. So Meena Naik is from the University of North Texas, and Ryan Zervakos is with LinkedIn. I could spend a lot of time reading illustrious bios to you all, but I hope that you'll trust me when I say that they're really smart, thoughtful folks, and that there's a reason that we've invited them here today to join us. And I encourage you to look at their bios, but we're not going to take the time during today's conversation to walk through that. We are also going to leave plenty of time for your questions. I'll be monitoring the chat during the conversation here in case interesting things pop up, but we have definitely bracketed out the time for this conversation to ensure that we will have enough time for your questions, because there's nothing worse than a session where you feel like you get all the way to the end and then there's 90 seconds for questions and then they're closing out. And I promise not to do that to you. So, Meena, I'd love to start with you, because a big part of advocacy is really just making sure that people know what the future can look like, sort of imagining their way into it. How has your institution, the University of North Texas, been building that skills-based learner-to-employer pipeline?
Yeah, no, thanks, Amanda. That's a great question. And thanks everyone for joining and for having me on today. I think one of the biggest things is, how do we start normalizing the value of skills as equivalent and as meaningful as the grade, as the transcript, as the diploma, right? We heard in the opening panel about the currency kind of moving away from these sort of traditional records. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And so if nothing else, within sort of the quote unquote ivory tower of higher education, where we tend to live in this world of maintaining these forms of status quo, how do we start talking about skills in curriculum, in coursework, in a place where students are actually starting to get access to this information? And so I think for what we've been doing at UNT, a lot of the conversations have been around, one, just lifting up. If you talk to any educator, any faculty member at an institution, and you ask them about workforce, they may say that's not my job. But if you ask them about the skills that students are getting, critical thinking or teamwork or problem solving, they're going to say that's all over my coursework. That's everywhere. And the conversations that I'll typically have and the team here has is, okay, you know it's everywhere, but if you talk to the students or we go out and talk to the employers, they're not. They're saying they don't find it. They're saying there's a gap. And so can we just articulate that better? Can we start listing that out there? Can we use micro-credentials and the movement towards LERs to start elevating and lifting that up? And better yet, can we connect that by connecting these skills over time across these credentials, validated through assessments? And so that's one of the biggest things we're doing. And we're doing it assuming that someday the employer pipeline will be ready.
That is I think, a really important series of assumptions that you've laid out and a really important series of activities. I do want to just flag, I know a lot of folks listening today are pretty immersed in this world. Some of you may be newer. So when we say a phrase like LER, that's learning and employment record. And again, some of you may use a different phrase to talk about the same concept. Some of you may be really immersed in this, but just wanting to flag some of the jargon as we go through here. So, Ryan, I want to turn to you. Not all institutions and certainly not all employers are as big as the University of North Texas, where Meena works. Particularly for smaller employers or smaller organizations, they might not have the in-house wherewithal to be thinking about this. Can you talk about what kind of tools LinkedIn has developed that folks might want to use in their own internal advocacy within their organizations about the skills-based learning and earning ecosystem?
Sure, absolutely. First thing I want to say is that I make no guarantee about my expertise, okay? I just work for LinkedIn and that's about it. No, I'm kidding. The interesting thing about LinkedIn is that we are really going full force with this idea of skills as a currency. And Meena, you were actually kind of mentioning it. It's hilarious that you said those words because our CEO, Ryan Roslansky, actually said those exact words as LinkedIn looks at skills as a currency. That's where it is going. I think that the thing that I try to do as a person who works at LinkedIn and sees the back end of what we're trying to do, which we're trying to create economic opportunity, equitable economic opportunity for everyone. When we think about tools that you can use, LinkedIn obviously comes to mind. That's where I'm the expert at, right? That's the expert in quotes. But the idea really is to have tools at the tip of your hand, whether it's online or on your phone, to find out what skills are in demand. If you're an organization, you can go on to LinkedIn right now and check out our economic graph. And we're going to tell you what skills are in demand in your area, what skills are in demand for certain jobs, using the technology that's out there that is free, right? A lot of our content out there is free. So that you can see where tendencies are going and where trends are going when it comes to those skills. The other thing is that it's also, in my opinion, it's empowering the individual to take control of their own destiny. And that's really important when we think about what's going on these days. I work with a lot of colleges and universities, and one of the things that I enjoy most about my role is the ability to work with career services, the ability to work with deans, and the idea of partnering with academic institutions to see if our insights make a difference, right? LinkedIn has almost 800 million members in our network. We've got 15 million job postings. All of those job postings tells us what skills are required. So this skills taxonomy now, it's not like there's so much more data now that it's really a matter of how do you go and find that information that's relevant to you as an individual or you as an institution, and then how do you practically apply it? And it doesn't matter if you're a smaller institution or a larger institution. There's just a ton of free resources, not just on LinkedIn, by the way. Obviously, I'm biased, but there are a ton of there's a ton of information out there. So I say, go out and get the information, realize from our perspective, one of the things that people don't realize about LinkedIn, I'll just give you a really quick tidbit about monetization on the back end. It's recruiting is where we make most of our money, meaning that we know what recruiters are looking for. And we know that skills quantifiably differentiate one candidate from the next for a fact. So if you know that from your perspective, that skills are very, very important to recruiters, and we know that for a fact, then how do we let people advocate for themselves, and how do we let small institutions find what skills are important and let students know better to let people know how to get those skills?
Ryan, what I really appreciate about what you just said is sort of folks not needing to reinvent the wheel, that there are free resources out there to help them think about skills-based hiring and not have to just write the whole thing from scratch. Just keeping it real over here, I heard a really startling story the other day from an institution that's really been rhetorically on board with skills-based hiring. They recently posted one of their own jobs, and their HR department decided to winnow down the massive number of applications they had gotten by just looking closely at the ones where they'd gotten a personal referral. So, of course, that completely undercut the skills-based hiring approach, right? And so when we think about the folks who might be listening to today's conversation, who are trying to help their own organizations kind of get over the hump of, theory and into practice when it comes to skills-based hiring, thinking about being an internal advocate in your organization and using the kind of tools that Ryan's talking about can be really helpful in helping your HR folks, your other folks, hiring managers know that they don't have to start from scratch in this process. Meena, some of the other folks listening today are educators in higher ed and adult education, all kinds of different educational settings. What do you see as educators' responsibility to contribute to the skills-based ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a pragmatic question, I think, in that we can talk about what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And I think it really boils down to if the responsibility of education, sort of as an institution, is to the learners, the learner earner, as we've been hearing throughout some of the other sessions, then we need to be giving them what will help them onto their next step. If we don't do that, then we'll disappear in some ways. We'll kind of fall into a void. And if I talk from the perspective of higher education, which is where I am, we're competing with on-demand education, with these massive online courses like Coursera and edX. We're competing with the fact that learners do in fact have access to their information and what they need to learn to be able to succeed in other jobs. They don't need us. We want them to need us, and we still believe in the value of higher education. I personally believe in the value of higher education, but if I can't win that market, there's no point. There's nothing I can do, right? So if we are talking about empowering the learner, giving them what they need so that they maintain their social mobility, which in this case, Ryan, and I'm thrilled to hear kind of this context of the skills currency really gaining momentum, such, as high up as your CEO. If that is the currency and that's what they need, and we as educators are not meeting that need, we are not fulfilling our responsibility. Does that mean we have to change education or the systems and structures? I won't answer that. I have personal opinions on, I won't get into that. But if I'm talking just pragmatically, it really is as simple as, hey, look, in this history class that you don't know why you're taking, you're gaining a very valuable ability to engage in critical thinking and to be able to carry this forward. I'm going to do you one better. In this assignment, I'm going to evaluate you and assess you, and you're going to earn something that sort of signals that, just like the grade signals course completion, just like the diploma signals degree completion. And this is another tool that you have in your toolkit to carry forward. One of the biggest things I tell students all the time is if all we needed to apply and land a job was our educational background, we could apply with our transcripts and our diplomas. And that's just not the case. That's not what it is. And so if we're not starting to fill that gap, I think education will start to continue to fall off the rails.
Meena, I think what's so powerful about what you just said is the idea of starting with a value that everybody in higher education shares, right? Everybody values a student or learner-centered experience. So if we start with that value of a learner-centered experience, how do we then do well by learners as the world changes around them? Learners say that one of the major reasons they pursue education is to get a job or get a better job, right? So how do we help them translate what they're learning into what they've identified as their goals? So Ryan, I want to, go ahead and jump in.
Can I just jump in on that real quickly? Or as we say in tech, can I double click on that? I'm not really a fan of the double click, but anyhow, I want to actually go a step further from what Meena was saying and say that we know quantifiably at LinkedIn that it really pretty much doesn't matter what you study, you can get a job anywhere. And so I'm thinking, like, I was reached out to by a big UC campus. It's like our humanities division is losing students because they think they need to go into business or they think they need to get these practical degrees. Well, we know with data that your skills are important and you can learn those skills studying just about whatever you want. So if we opened ourselves up on the academic side saying, come study what you love, you can get a job doing just about anything you want, right? I mean, there are some things like chemical engineering, and if you need to go, medical school, obviously. But for the vast majority of jobs, you just need a degree. And so I think we could actually really accelerate, the transition to this idea that I have to study a certain thing to get a job if we built in these skills, the ability to learn skills as you go along and practically apply those within any academic institution or any degree.
Well, speaking as someone with a humanities degree who's managed to stay employed for 20 years because of the writing and critical thinking skills that I learned, that is a very vivid example to me.
Exactly.
So let's talk now about equity. I am excited, but also I have a lot of trepidation around the issue of equity, right? We know that the current system, which is often affinity-based hiring, doesn't serve people very well. Hiring managers are really likely to hire people who remind them of themselves. And we can think about all the reasons why that might cause them to miss out on some key talent. So there's some evidence to suggest that a skills-based hiring process could actually be a better tool for closing racial equity gaps than that kind of affinity-based hiring that often happens. On the other hand, the kind of history of this country is that inequities persist across systems, and it's hard to imagine that a skills-based system can close inequities unless we're really deliberate and intentional about doing that. So what should people be keeping in mind when they're advocating for a skills-based system as one part of improving racial equity?
That's a difficult question when you're saying what should they keep in mind, because I think the system, like you said, is going against everything, and quite frankly, human nature, right? We want to work with people that we get along with, and I think that's one of the things I mentor and coach a lot of students. I do a lot of LinkedIn workshops, and we just have to be honest that you're talking about people hiring people. So that's just a fact. I mean, I think I do want to let you know that LinkedIn is working on a tool that you can go in, and it's going to be a skills-based hiring tool where you can say, I want this job. I need these skills. I'm going to take these skills. I'm going to get assessment. I'm going to get validated. So that will be coming in the future. Just super, super exciting. So things like that, I think are important. But at the end of the day, I always think that academia hasn't really embraced the fact that we live in a social society, and it's really dictated by social media, and not all social media is evil. Again, going back to LinkedIn or going back to even Indeed or any other of these platforms where the job hunter or the student is looking for a job, they've got to put themselves out there. And if you have education systems where faculty, who are the best subject matter experts out there, right, are on platforms advocating for their students, or advocating for not just their students, but the students at their organization, I think that will help change the dynamic completely. Because who knows the student better than the person that's leading that student, right? Who knows the student better than that professor? And I think there's a miss there where you can jump onto, again, I do apologize because I'm talking about LinkedIn only, but that's what I know, right? There are other things. Discord is a new platform. I never even heard of Discord, but Discord is a new platform where if faculty starts thinking about it, how society is changing so rapidly, like how do they keep up, and how they advocate for themselves, they being faculty, but also how do they start saying, look at this student, look at what she's done. And look at how talented she is. She's a first-gen student, right? Underrepresented student. We need to give this student a chance. And when I think about society, when I think about opportunity, when I was going to school, how could I reach 5,000 people, 10,000 people? It was impossible. You'd have to buy advertisement. Today, you can go and build your following over time, and you can reach 5,000, 6,000 people with a single post. So if I'm in higher education, I'm trying to get my staff and my faculty to start having their own voice and saying, here's what I teach, here's what I do. Have you thought about that? Contributing to the social fabric in that way. And then also, oh, by the way, check out this student. She's amazing. Check out this student. He's amazing. He's got the skills. She's got the skills. And now it's changing the dynamic completely.
So one of the things I heard you say, Ryan, that, forgive me, I want to double click on is this idea that humans are hiring humans, and we're not going to change that. but we want to give them a skills-based currency and vocabulary and kind of cognitive scaffolding to do that in a way that really reflects all of the skills that people are bringing to the table. And Meena, I want to turn to you. UNT, University of North Texas, is a Hispanic serving institution. It is a federally designated, college that is, as the U.S. Department of Education says, an MSI. It serves many students who are the first in their families to attend college. So how have you intentionally designed equity into the skills-based processes that your institution is adopting?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I sort of doubling down on this idea of like humans hiring humans, I think the reality is that even in academia, we're educating one another peer to peer, and then also faculty to student, as humans educating humans. And so it's hard to imagine breaking down these systemic issues and inequities, right, just by some of these changes. But this is, I think, where research-based practices really start to come in. So one of the things that's really out there for educators is this concept of transparency in education, right? And I was even just reading in the chat box of a recent graduate, if I knew my required electives had some value, it might have helped, right? That transparency piece is so important, especially for people who are first in their families to go to college, because they don't know and they have absolutely no one there to help contextualize that experience. And so what if that move for transparency was, hey, you're getting this general skill, this people skill, this ability to, kind of deal with empirical and quantitative reasoning, all the way up through the more job specific for those degrees where, there's a clear, I think, Ryan, as you said, right, chemical engineering, there's a clear track. You get a degree and then you're able to find this sort of path of jobs. Then let's get technical about what those skills are. And those little pieces start to, one, connect that learning experience, but it also helps that student engage in that metacognitive. And so that small change in transparency is something that actually has a huge equity impact, because if all faculty start doing that, they're reaching all of their students. But I think the other thing is we're also just going to where students are at. And so reaching them in the core curriculum, everyone has to take that. Reaching them in these degrees, one of the things that we talk a lot about here is the idea of going into the liberal arts degrees, right? As you shared, Amanda, right? There's no job track that comes out. And so how do we also facilitate that so that if students are in fact going to be more successful and more likely to persist, particularly our underserved and underrepresented students who need that job and who need to be able to communicate value for education. But you know what? They're just going to do well in a sociology course area because they care about how the world works. They don't necessarily see that career that comes out of it. What do we do for them? And I think in those places, the more and more that we can build in the skills conversation and then add on to it the assessed credential. Now I've got my diploma, I've got my grades, I've got the resume that I probably went to the Career Center to build. But instead of having that section on there that says relevant coursework, I've got the credentials to kind of give me that confidence boost I need to better articulate and communicate the skills that make me a good candidate for thousands of jobs that I otherwise wouldn't think about. And I think that at scale is feasible far more than any other systemic attempt we want to make, especially at UNT, which, is over 42,000 students. We can't make some of these broader reaching changes. That one makes a big impact though.
Yeah, so I have one more question about skepticism that I want to get to, but I just want to lift up something I just heard you say, Meena, that I think is so, so important, that an equity strategy is about making implicit things explicit. And by getting transparent about what are the competencies and the skills people are acquiring, and by giving them the tools to talk about their competencies and skills in ways that employers and others can recognize. And I think, for those of us who might be sitting within policy or research organizations, or who might be advocating with philanthropic funders, thinking about making implicit codes explicit is an equity strategy that we already know and apply in other areas. So we ought to be thinking about it when it comes to the skill area. And I think that's so powerful that came out of what you were saying. So we're going to go to audience questions in just a second, but I do have one last question for each of you, which is about skepticism. One of the most common responses that I hear is, well, I get why workers would be really excited about a skills-based hiring process. What about employers? Why should they care? So Ryan, what's your response to that?
Well, my response is that they already care, that they're there right now. The bottom line is that easy apply, which is what we call it. Indeed, Monster, you name it. There are so many applicants for every single job. ATS, applicant tracking systems, are in almost 90% of the Fortune 1000 companies, which means that they are trying to scale for minimum qualifications. And that is just, those are skills. So, LinkedIn has 15 million job postings, about 2 billion applications per year for 15 million job postings. How does a hiring manager screen through all that is quantifiable? It's through skills. And so I'm telling you right now that they're looking for skills. I met a young student. She's a first-gen student. She got her first job at Microsoft because she took an extra course outside of school and put it on her LinkedIn profile that she studied shadow IT. I've never even heard of shadow IT. She studied shadow IT. They had a conversation during the interview. And afterwards, he said, "You're the only student that went above and beyond. You're the only student that differentiated yourself and showed that you had this skill." And that's what I would say. It's an easy way to be equitable and say, "Oh, this person," and let's just be honest, less training you have to do. You have to train less when you hire that person.
I love it. So you're telling me leading employers are already there. This will help your applicant tracking systems winnow down on a more equitable sort of currency, which is skills. And it'll save time on the job onboarding side because you won't be doing as much training because some folks will already be walking in the door with the skills that you most need.
Exactly.
Meena, let's talk about skepticism. I think often it emerges because people can't really fully imagine the new world while we're all still living in the old world. So how is the University of North Texas tackling the challenge of building for a skills-based ecosystem that actually doesn't really exist yet?
It's a fair question. And I would say it's one we're figuring out in real time. So please, as I share what I share, it could be different tomorrow. But I think, again, there's the simple statement of can we, as faculty, staff, the institution, actually start reflecting on how we're delivering these skills and then help students in that reflection as well? Because that then, I think, Ryan, to your point, that student, right, it gives them the ability to go in and talk about it, but also see what opportunities are available to them. But in terms of the skepticism, I think the issue actually has a lot more to do with how do we get to the validation, right? So is it a badge? Is it a certificate? Is it on the transcript? And that's actually the question that I tend to, as I'm talking to others, say, hey, let's not let that stop us because we know that this is the direction things are going. Let's start testing. And I think I heard it in another session as well. If we don't start running through this, we won't figure out what works and what doesn't. So if we can contribute to the skills ecosystem, maybe what UNT has been testing out is digital badges, but maybe it's something else in the future. What we're doing is we're laying the infrastructure for what will be, and we're trying to build it in an open way so that when that currency kind of finds its transmission mechanism, the technical mechanism, right now we've got the diploma and transcripts. When that one comes out with what it's going to look like, all we have to do is plug in because we got there. And I think if we don't do that, we're missing the opportunity, and things move so fast that opportunity will put us in a void where we will no longer be relevant.
Absolutely. I think that is such an important point. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that HR processes can change really quickly when they have to. So that's really interesting. Meena, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
No worries. Can you hear me? You good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
There we go. Sorry, I think there was a little bit of a lag. Okay. So we are starting to get some audience questions, which is fabulous. We have talked a little bit about advocating within your organization or your institution. We've talked about advocating with employers. We've talked about advocating a little bit with policymakers. Let's talk for a minute about the universe of philanthropic funders. There's a small subset of funders who are already there, right? They're funding events like this one, like the Open Skills Network. But a lot of funders, including those who have a dog in this fight, right? They care about equity, they care about poverty, they care about workforce, they care about technology, they care about you name it. They're not there yet. So let's imagine ourselves into a grant maker conversation. what are some themes that you would really want to emphasize in advocating for a skills-based learning and earning ecosystem if that were the audience you were talking to right now?
I think you stumped us a little bit on that. Not entirely. I don't know, Ryan. You gotta first go on that one, or you want me to?
Well, I mean, I think if we're talking to philanthropic agencies, to me it comes down to equity, right, and inclusion. How do we help those that are underrepresented, those that don't have the same advantages as others to get to A, they need to know that the skills are necessary, and B, they need to be able to get access to them. By the way, Meena, I just want to kind of go back to your last answer, where in California, one of the colleges I work with is looking at these skills that every student gets going through their track and trying to validate them and saying, okay, you need additional skills, and then having a college or university do a badge. To me, and at LinkedIn, we see that is more valuable than just like a LinkedIn Learning certificate or like a Khan Academy certificate. So I'm just throwing that out there. But getting back to your original question, I just think the best thing to do is showcase with data and make data-driven decisions that we know that underrepresented first-gen students, they don't have the same access. So we need to get them access to being able to build those skills. And also, in my opinion, networking. They need to be able to network for a job, because 70% of jobs come through network. So that's how I would approach it to those that are interested in making a difference at scale, is do that, and do that through technology. And
actually, ending on technology, that's where I was kind of coming at it from. There's the equity access piece of how do we also then make sure that we're not increasing the disparity because of how this is technologically distributed. Yeah. And I think that's probably the other big section of, and maybe it's not the tech building solution, but it's the digital literacy around that, so that there's credibility in all the right market spaces for the students who are least likely to know how to take advantage of it, so that they see value in recognizing that as well.
Yeah, real quickly, in California, the CSUs are mainly Hispanic serving institutions. Their career services, they have about 550,000 students across the system. Their career services can only touch about 19% of the students, but that's a fact. And if we think about the students that they're not touching, those are the people that are working full time, that are commuting to work, that are going to school and then going back to work. And they're the ones that need the help. And so how do you scale that through equitable technology? That's what I would say. It's like, we've got to hit them where they are, figure out how to get them to understand that they need these skills, and then how can they acquire the skills and then represent themselves. So that's where I would get people that are outside of academia to figure that problem out.
I really appreciate that both of you had that really great big picture kind of macro level thinking. I think the last point I would just flag before we move on to the next question is, funders are themselves employers. They're hiring people. Mm-hmm. And my guess is most of them haven't yet switched to a skills-based hiring process. So one thing to think about if you're talking to a philanthropic audience is to have them imagine, what would it take for them to shift, and what would be the benefits to them in making that shift? Sometimes, the old joke, there's no zealot like a convert. If you want to convert a funder to caring about a skills-based process, you might want to, have them actually adopt it internally. In some cases, that might actually be harder, but worth thinking about. We also have another question here, and I want to go back to it because, Meena, you mentioned it earlier, but, and I can tell this person is a recent grad because they are using the term flex in the way that Gen Z uses the term flex. I love it. But we have this great question of, if professors and educators really emphasize what skills were being developed and why, that could help students to kind of have a better picture of that. Is there anything else you want to add on that point, Meena? I know you've talked about this quite a bit, so you may feel like you've said a lot, but anything else you want to add on that point?
I think it's one thing for individual instructors to do that. How great would it be if the entire curriculum and that journey is mapped to that? And so that's one of the things that we're working on, with individual degrees and cohorts is within a degree path, within a series of classes that also scaffold on each other, right? You go from your 100s or your 1000s to your 400s or your 4000s. Can you see a skill evolve over time? And, to use your term, Amanda, cognitive scaffolding, right? Now, if I track that skill at 5 or 6 time points across a more complex development of courses, it also helps the learner in a place where me as an individual instructor, I may not pay attention to what my peers are doing, but on the side of the learner, because all of these are linked together through skills pathways and mapping, if we can communicate that effectively to the learners, then what they start to see is, oh, it's not just that this was a prerequisite required class and then this was my capstone. There's all these pieces along the way that I learned, and I can track the exact places I learned it, which can help me when I'm in interviews, can help me particularly with the way that interviews go more and more with, I'm forgetting the term now, not the case-based, but the idea that I have to be able to do sort of behavioral interviewing, right? Where I have to be able to answer those questions. It's not just that, well, there was this one time in a group project where I did blank, blank, and blank. It's here are like 5 concrete things that honestly I would have tossed out of my brain because I took the class and passed it, that I can now kind of come back around to. And I think that it signals in a totally different way the value of education and the value of the whole of the experience, right? The liberal arts education, the 4-year degree, and all of those things, which is what we're fighting for, at least on the side of academia. That's what we're fighting to keep alive.
I think that's really important. So we have another big picture question that I would sort of call the rubber meets the road, which is essentially, are you really seeing employers that are actually adopting this, are recognizing skills, valuing a skills-based candidate, embracing it as part of their recruiting process? I would just flag, we're seeing certainly some corporations identify it as a part of their internal path to promotion, right? So we've seen some employers who very explicitly said, we want you to be able to get promoted. And in order to get promoted, we need to know what skills you have. And we recognize that whatever we had from your resume when we hired you 5 years ago is probably not helpful in helping us figure that out. But I'd love to hear each of your answers, Ryan first and then Meena, about, really rubber meets the road. What are we seeing from employers in making this shift?
Well, the bottom line is that the skills that are in demand today are changing so rapidly. And so the companies that aren't looking at hiring the people with the right skills, also, by the way, resiliency and the ability to adapt are huge skills that they're looking for, right? A continual growth mindset is another one. Problem solving is another one, right? So what we see is that most companies realize that things are changing. COVID has changed the game. COVID has accelerated the learning curve, and it accelerated the pace of change. And people weren't accustomed to that. Our platform, LinkedIn Learning, we were trying to get to 2 million active users per week, 2 million active users per week. And we thought that was going to take us years to get to. We went from 500,000 to 1 million the first month of COVID, and the second month of COVID to 2 million. If that doesn't tell you people wanted to learn new skills and needed new skills, I don't know what does. And it's just a microcosm. So, it's just a fact that is, and again, I want to get back to the fact that it's more equitable. You can, you can see a skill, it's quantifiable. So I think it's real. I think it's there. And I think most companies are looking at that from equity, but they're also looking at it from a cost perspective. It's easier to hire somebody who knows what to do than to train them.
Great. Meena, I'm going to come to you on this question, and then we're going to do a one-word closeout because we're at time just about. So anything you want to add about what we're seeing rubber meets the road on employers?
All I'll say is that, we had a conversation here with our UNT system HR as a massive employer in the North Texas region across 3 institutions. And when we talked to the head of HR here, when she learned what we were doing, she said, I am going to go into my HR system and I'm going to talk to my team to have them flip on this option for folks to start, talking about their validated skills. It was one of those, it was a no-brainer for her. And I think that to me signals a big thing, because if as an institution that's trying to do this work, we have someone internally that's willing to pick up on it. That says a lot. And I think OSN, the work of the T3 network and some of those other places show that we're headed down this path. I think it's just a matter of going from this ideal to application.
All right, so folks are about to leave this breakout and head back to the general session. We want them to leave with one word to think about when it comes to advocating for a skills-based learning and earning ecosystem. Audacious. Ryan, what would you like your word to be?
Audacious. I don't know one word. Equitable.
All right.
I knew you were going to use that.
Sorry.
You it. Empowerment.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So you're all empowered to audaciously advocate for an equitable skills-based learning earning ecosystem. Go forth and return to the general session. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Meena.
Thanks, everybody.